Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 5th of February, and today's video is so important on several levels. First of all, we're beginning with the usual frontline updates, looking at the Andriiva Pokrovsk, but most importantly, the Oskil River front, because now there is another Russian bridgehead that we have to account for. We're going to look at its elevation today and some of the recent Russian advances along that western river bank. We're also going to look at really interesting reporting coming out of Ukrainian journalist Yuri Betusov. He discussed reforms that were just finalized and are now in the process of being implemented following approval from Syrskyi, and now it has been handed over to Zelensky. And so we're going to look at the details of his reporting. Of course, this is not anything that was officially announced yet by the Ukrainian MOD or by their government, but it is being reported on by one of the largest Ukrainian military journalists that is present in the information space. So, of course, I'm going to break down everything using the context of 2 years plus of tracking Ukrainian units and their structure. And now I want to begin by zooming in on the front line just south of Andriiva. As I do that, please like and subscribe. And now let's get into this. You could see over here that on February 5th, the 37th Marine Brigade, they conducted a localized counterattack. They've done this numerous times in the Zelenivka area, and I've explained why, but let's just say again, Zelenivka is the final sort of way that the Ukrainians can hold on to an extended buffer zone south of Ulakli, and by extension, the Vavcha River and various other suburbs leading into Andriivka itself. And so it's very important for them to create this sort of wedge between the Russian momentum that really was building up along the Sukhyali River, which culminated with the capture of Uspanivka. And since then, they've been able to capture open field after open field, including ridges and advancing along the river valley itself. But now they've hit a sort of pause, and the Russian momentum over here is stalled. A lot of units have been redeployed elsewhere, and the units that were involved initially in hopping from village to village, a lot of them now are engaged in operational rest. So there is an opportunity presented for the Ukrainians here with their specialized brigade, the 37th, probably the best unit they have in this specific location. They have the ability to send in vehicles, dismount in tree lines, take them over on a small scale. We're talking about 20 hectares. But again, it's a part of just strengthening that frontline perimeter. An area where that is not occurring is in Darnia, because right now the Russian forces are advancing deeper into the town. First of all, my map may actually be over exaggerating Ukrainian positions, because some Russian sources are claiming that they've already been able to take portions of this central residential area. It amounts to, let's say, what is this, 30 hectares of territory. A lot of this in the center, where you have a lot of the houses and basements that the Ukrainian units have been dug in through for so long now. But areas where we actually have geolocated confirmation are a bit to the south. There are two videos. First one is from February 4th of Russian sappers that were able to advance on foot to one of these tree lines, place mines, and then damage in a Ukrainian armored personnel carrier that moved to the front line to provide frontline support and target advancing Russian forces, and in the row on the right ended up getting damaged. Now, here you have on February 4th a video from the 33rd Mechanized Brigade of their drones dropping grenades onto individual Russian soldiers in that same tree line region. And so this is pretty good confirmation for us that there has been a unit rotation, where in the 46th Air Assault Brigade, now, a lot of its responsibility has been moved northwestwards to actually engage in fighting in Andriivka, whereas the 33rd Brigade, which was really important earlier on in the fighting when the front line was more so focused on areas like Dakhnia, and if we go back even further, areas like Pobieda, it's basically been on this sort of parallel line that now extends northwestwards, sort of all the way to what is now the open fields west of Dakhnia. Now they're going to continue with that sort of activity and try to hold back the Russian forces. And it does appear that the Russian forces are trying to flank on a small scale. We're not looking at any sort of major maneuver, but just trying to flank and create pressure for the remaining Ukrainian holdouts by advancing from the south and then firing northwards and exerting physical pressure by attacking towards some of the duplexes or larger structures like warehouses and hospital in this area. But when it comes to other frontline updates, we do have changes on the Dnipro axis, as they like to refer to it now. You can see over here that Sribny continues to be contested, but the Russians are gaining much more ground. They've captured 1.8 square kilometers over the past 2 days, largely in these open fields that are in on larger elevation. Sribny itself is actually on pretty high elevation, and so is the area to the north of it. So now the Russians are beginning to seize on those locations where there is a lack of Ukrainian presence at the moment. A lot of the Ukrainian resistance is concentrated in the populated regions because those are the areas where they want to prevent Russian deep penetrations. In areas where there are open fields, because the Russians aren't really using armored vehicles over here, they are able to outsource that to FPV drones and grenade drops, although that's not foolproof. But they focus their infantry whenever it's needed in order to counter Russian advances on very specific corridors. So over the past couple of days, it's been along, say, this road and this road leading into Zaporizhia, for instance. But nonetheless, the Russians have been able to take over additional parts of the easternmost blocks of Srebny and also advance a bit further south, south of Nadivka. But there are active Ukrainian counterattacks over here trying to regain territory in the tree lines and fields south of that village. Again, being organized by Brigades 151, 153, 11th National Guard Brigade. But moving on northwards, I do want to look at this interesting video. This is from the Platov units, Russian drone units. And over here, this is from February 5th. They targeted a Ukrainian armored vehicle, a UAT Gyurza, and also a Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. They were hit by FPV drones during an armored attack into the heart of Pischane. Again, the Ukrainians, I've warned about this numerous times. They do have the ability to pull off localized counterattacks in this region. Notably, they were able to do so in Udachny and push back the Russians slightly and prevent them from actually taking it over in its entirety. So that was very important about a week and a half ago. Also, they were able to conduct localized counterattacks in areas in the southeast Kotline that are currently still raging on. And as a result, the front line is sort of stabilized. And I should mark this with a red color to indicate that. So this is a part of Ukraine's active defensive measures because they understand that the further they get pushed back, it's going to become much more difficult to reverse those advances. And so now that they've been engaged in this sort of continued retreat, almost losing out on the entire Udachne Kodline rail line sort of position, they realized that it was now or never for conducting localized counterattacks. And so that's why the pressure was ramped up in these two villages, respectively. It's why the Ukrainians moved in a couple new units like the 42nd Mechanized Brigade and the 3rd Spartan National Guard Brigade. Now they're engaged in extremely heavy clashes on the front line. And doing so in tandem with Brigade 155 and the Scala Assault Regiment. So they're all working in tandem, and a lot of them are offensive minded. And that's also one of the reasons why the Russians have been unable to capture all of Vodachnia and by extension the mine factory over here. Doing so would entail the complete loss of this open field region north of the current front line, which is located on high elevation and also is the southern flank to the E50 highway leading into Pokrovsk. So that's the reasoning for why the Ukrainians are pouring in all these resources, just as a background. But also in Pischane, it's important because the Russians do have a direct route through Zvirove and then Leontivici to reach into the actual perimeter and residential areas of Pokrovsk. So it's another area where the Ukrainians do need to sort of reduce the pressure that's being exerted. And Pischane is one of the main organization points for those Russian attacks. And so over here, you can see they were able to send in those armored vehicles at a maximum, we'll say 1.2 kilometers southwestwards from the rail line and then extending in along this road, making it into the building materials plant and industrial district of the town. But by then they were repelled by the Russian side. I don't know the status of Eastern Pischane in its entirety right now due to the ongoing Ukrainian attacks in this region. But we'll have to see if they're able to actually gain a foothold and then sort of drag out the fighting in the hopes of stabilizing something in a sort of new status quo, or whether they get quickly pushed back by the Russian side. And then we begin to see just a grinding pace of the Russians beginning to gradually take over areas like Zvirove and other populated suburbs. Those are the two possibilities, really. Now, as we look northwards, I really do want to focus ourselves on the situation unfolding on the Oskil River fronts. So, as you guys remember, the Russian forces were able to expand northeast of Dvorychna, and that was the previous topic of discussion in one of my videos. But now you can see even more substantial advances by the Russian forces amounting to 8.9 square kilometers. That is significant in this area because we're looking at the Russians taking over large chunks of territory across a river that's in this location, it's pretty narrow, but generally could be pretty wide, and was not entered by the Russians for a really extended period of time. Now they're making it back in and able to penetrate pretty much in a deep manner. So you can see they were able to take over all of Zapadnya. This is from February 4th. And this indicates that there were FPV strikes. I just don't know why I didn't mention the title, but this video came from the Comanche drone units of the 40th Artillery Brigade. They're operating around here, striking individual Russian soldiers as they advanced and took over the village in its entirety, and also advanced southwards. That's important to note. And in the process, took over additional parts of the you could say river bank, and also Kalinova, this hamlet that's basically non-existent, but it's more about taking over the territory and also the local paths that then would give access to an area like Kolobivka, and also just capturing some of these ridges that overlook portions of the roads leading into Kupiansk. That is extremely important because now, due to these Russian expansions, it's not just about establishing a permanent base, but it's about expanding in a manner that would then be really, really helpful for the Russian side to move in southwards and attack the western part of Kupiansk. And right now, it's beginning to form. We're in that sort of molding stage. And it's extremely important that the Ukrainians get the situation under control right now before the Russians begin to set up pontoon bridges over here, move over armored vehicles, move mortars closer to the front line, and all in all, sort of begin to take it as a given that they actually do have this bridgehead as a permanent part of their frontline plans. And so it's always best to sort of kill off these sort of plans in their infancy. But right now, the Ukrainian garrison is insufficient to do so because we do have the drone units from the 40th Artillery Brigade. That's true. You also have the 40th Rifle Battalion, small units. 78th Hertz Regiment is floating around here, but I haven't seen much from them. Then you have one battalion of the 10th Brigade, and then you have 112th TDF Brigade. So again, none of the high caliber, and the ones that are pretty good are small in size. So the Ukrainians should move into this area, one or two more brigades at least from the Vovchansk region, preferably, or Hlibok areas, because those are less critical right now. They wouldn't be destroyed if they were to move a couple of units away from those locations. And that could actually go a long way in preventing further collapses in the Kharkiv region looking deeper into 2025. But interestingly, that is not the only bridgehead. You could see over here, very close to the border between Russia and Ukraine, there has been another noted Russian bridgehead. And this is reported on by Deep State. They claim that beginning in early January, the Russians were surveying this location as a potential bridgehead area. Then by mid January, they started launching operations. Initially, they were repelled. They attacked in another area and have been able to retain control ever since. There was also another attempt by the Russians to cross over in an area that is in between the villages of Topoli and Kamyanka, probably around here, that has not been successful yet, according to the Ukrainian side. But the area where they were able to achieve advances over here, very, very close to the border, 1.3 square kilometers. This is good for Russia because, again, they have the northern grouping of forces, which is largely split up between the Vovchansk region and the Kursk region. But just generally, having a front line open up, even if it's very small in scale, so close to the home front, to the rear, an area like Avaluki, for instance, where you do have all of these logistics nodes already built up in preparation, it's good, and it makes the process of attacking and moving shipments pretty easy, and sort of just makes it speed up. So now you have the Russian forces crossing over in certain locations. They have control over the sewer leading into the Poli, and the first objective to see whether this bridge that can actually stay and sustain itself would be to capture this location. And it is sort of enveloped because the Russians do have positions to the northeast and to the south. And Topoli would be interesting because it would be the first village that the Russians take over in its entirety over here. And then they would have the ability to sort of build off of that. But again, we're looking at a small force commitment. It could change, of course, but right now the Russians, we're talking about them taking over like chalk mountains that are in this region over here. We're not even looking at the settlement itself yet because the Ukrainian garrison over here, as small as it may be as well, is still resisting. So you do have a bit of a ridge over here. You have a bit of a valley in this location, then another valley here. Then you have this sort of like large ridge that I'm marking with these two larger red lines. Kamyanka itself is located on a river valley feeding into the Oskil River. But then from there, you have a lot of higher elevated regions in the sort of forested patches or ditches or just rugged areas located to the west. So all in all, it is a good location. It is a bit disconnected from the rest of the Ukrainian buildup in the Kharkiv region, but it is an area where the Russians have been able to pounce on and actually create an opportunity. Now, in any case, I want to look at the reporting from Yuri Butosov of the expansion of Ukraine's army corps structure. It's actually going to completely replace all of the other Ukrainian large structural formations. This is according to him, of course, and Butosov has been wrong in the past. So I want to just be fair and make that clear from the beginning, because he reported that brigades 158 to 150 or 162, with the exception of Brigade 161, would be disbanded. So he said that the Ukrainians would disband 4 brigades that were in the process of formation, that were sort of deemed as unnecessary, redundant, and then the new recruits would all be moved to other units that have already been established. And it is true that the Ukrainians are putting a pause on creating new brigades, but the ones that were already in the process of forming will continue to form, according to Ukrainian defense sources that actually do have government inside information, not external journalists. But regardless, something that has been known for a while and it has been claimed by the Ukrainians going back to November of last year is that they are planning to transition towards a core system. And I talked about it at the time, and then it sort of died down for a while. And I could understand why, because it takes a while to plan that, because right now the Ukrainian military structure is very convoluted. There's a lot of systematizing and organization that needs to be done, and it has to be executed in a way that doesn't disrupt the current frontline contingency and cohesiveness in a way that's too radical and actually allows the Russians to take advantage of it. But in any case, it is absolutely needed, because right now, as we look at it, the Ukrainians have 6 army corps, and there maybe are a couple others that aren't necessarily army corps, but they have a pretty similar function. So there are army corps 9, 10, and 11. I don't have their logos over here, but I'll just talk about them off the top of my head. Ninth Army Corps includes a 3rd Assault Brigade Azov, the 47th Mechanized Brigade, and a couple of other notable units like Brigade 67, which is probably operating right now around either Kursk or the Luhansk front. It might be split up right now, but you could see them generally operating in these regions, and then also Brigade 58. So you just get a wide variety of units that are not working together at all, which is why the current Army Corps structure, it does not have any sort of combat role. It's more so an administrative title and formation, which does lack meaning as a result. Like, look at it, Brigade 58, they are located over here after they were previously located around Velika Novosilka. And then, for instance, 47th is located in Kursk. So there's no sort of coherency to grouping them together if they're going to be separated. Then the 10th Army Corps, it's one that was really built for the counteroffensive. So at the time, it made sense, just purely from a theoretical standpoint. Of course, in practice, there were massive issues with the 10th Army Corps. But you have the 33rd Brigade and then 115th, 16th, 17th, 18th Mechanized Brigades. Those are all the new units, so-called NATO trained units that were created in the beginning of 2023 for the counteroffensive. And now, again, they're not working together on the same part of the front line. They've been, split up and moved to different sectors depending on the specific needs of the Ukrainians in those areas. You also have the 11th Army Corps. This one actually does have a bit of unity and a bit of reasoning behind its structure, because over here you have brigades 60th, 61 to 63, all of them right now generally operating around the Zherebets River fronts. So that one actually does make sense to a certain degree. And then you have the 12th Army Corps, which doesn't really have any public information disclosed about it. We don't know which Ukrainian units are operating in it right now, which is interesting. But you also have some specialized Army Corps. So you have the 7th Rapid Response Corps, that is the air assault units, and also the Jaeger brigades. A lot of them are located within it. There are actually 9 air assault or Jaeger brigades located within that Army Corps, which is absolutely insane. And when you look at it one by one, you'll see that a lot of the air assault units, they're not operating on the same part of the front line. Like, some of them are operating in Kursk, and they should probably be made into their own Army Corps. And then you have others that are located southwards operating around Pokrovsk. So there's, again, no continuity between those forces. And that's why they're going to be split up, according to Batusov's reporting, into two separate army corps, which also makes sense because 9 is really bloated for the size of an army corps, which, according to Batusov, will be about the size of 5 brigades. You also have the 30th Marine Corps, which is right now responsible for 7 Marine brigades. It's also going to undergo a massive restructuring because even though with 7 brigades on paper, a lot of those units have not been able to recover from the Krinky operation and from several other operations that led to huge attrition rates that really need to be dealt with. And that's why recently a lot of territorial defense brigades, they've been refitted as marine units or coastal defense brigades. So you have over here the 40th Coastal Defense Brigade. It was previously a TDF unit, and now it's been restructured. And also the 34th Coastal Defense Brigade. It was previously the 124th Kherson Territorial Defense Brigade. So again, it's already a part of the process of being restructured. And also, there's going to be a plan by the Ukrainians to massively increase the amount of staffing within the 30th Corps. So we're going to keep track of those massive changes. Another important thing to mention is that right now, and this is the truth for every single Army Corps almost, but especially for the 30th, is that they're not operating on the same parts of the front line. So it is planned that that will change and that eventually all the Marine brigades will be working together on the same sector, which again would make sense because of their designation. But Butuzov says that there are going to be 20 Army Corps built up based on brigades. So a certain brigade that has exhibited good experience and good command style, it built upon that. The Army Corps will be built upon those brigades, and those brigades that have that experience and the wherewithal, they will be the ones given the most autonomy and power and will be able to exert the most influence onto the other 4 or 5 brigades within the Army Corps. And of course, that will play a role in how resources are doled out and how command decisions are made. And so it really is a way to just scale from the ground up the units that have been able to prove over the past 2 years that they do have the ability to conduct these sort of ground operations, whether it be defensive or offensive. And the existing ones will be reformed significantly, moved from their sort of administrative state at the moment to a combat state where each one will be responsible for a certain sector on the front line. Just to give you guys an example, the 3rd Assault Brigade Azov, they are one of Ukraine's most combat capable units, and they are going to be in charge of one of the new Army Corps that is created. It's going to be called the 3rd Army Corps. It will be led by Andriy Belitsky, the current commander of the 3rd Azov Brigade. And again, when it comes to his acumen on the front line, he is considered to be one of Ukraine's better commanders. And this is interesting that he's still going to get a promotion, according to Betusov, because he's recently butted heads with the higher ups in the Ukrainian establishment, in the military establishment, I should say, like Siersky, and he's publicly called them out. But regardless, they're still going to promote him. And he was, of course, the original founder of the Azov Battalion. So that's interesting to keep in mind. Also, the 92nd Assault Brigade, which is currently, I believe, operating around the Vovchansk region, they have displayed some pretty good military results recently. They were actually moved recently to Kursk because their manpower and quality is needed over there for sustained defensive operations, but they're also going to have a core built around them. Also, the 12th Special Purpose Azov Brigade, which is part of the National Guard, they're also going to be expanded into an Army Corps, according to Yuri Betusov. Right now, they're operating around the Touretsk region. So that could be an area where, for instance, they get some more responsibility. And currently, it's led by Denis Prokopenko. So he would be the new commander of that Army Corps. And then you also have the 13th Khartia National Guard Brigade, and that brigade, I'm trying to think about where Harty is located. I believe it's on the Vovchansk front, and they're going to be built up into an army corps as well, currently led by Ihor Obolyensky. But Tusov, as I said before, he could be wrong about some of these things, but just think about it: 20 army corps, a lot of them built off of existing brigades, and other ones could potentially be used off of new brigades that will be grouped together. So, as an example, the 4 brigades that Butusov reported would be disbanded but are not going to be disbanded, according to Ukrainian sources, they could be molded into one single army corps, but just a new one basically, and they would just be raised up together and deployed to a certain area. That's certainly a possibility. But there are a lot of questions because currently the Ukrainian military, it's not even just the armed forces of Ukraine, but it consists of the National Guard, of the National Police Forces, of Ranger regiments, of a lot of independent drone units, independent assault battalions, regiments. Again, so many different elements, rifle battalions. The list goes on and on. And I don't know, it has not been addressed properly with the current reporting how they're going to be incorporated into all of this, whether they're still going to be given a level of independence. Same thing with artillery brigades, for instance, or logistics units, support units, all of that, or whether they'll be added in to the structure of a specific army corps. But again, it's 20, so just imagine the amount of investment that will need to be done in staffing and in the headquarters for these sort of various army corps. It's something that will take time to actually get fully fleshed out. And you can imagine the sort of instability that would be caused by completely moving around brigades from one region to another in order to sort of fit them within the framework of a certain army corps, unless the Ukrainians are willing to sort of just scrape the current structure of the army corps and create new ones based off of the current locations of brigades in order to sort of reduce the amount of movement that happens. But regardless of what does happen, there definitely will be some movement, at least to a certain degree, because right now, as I gave with the example of the air assault or the Marines, they're not together, and they will have to be shuffled back in order to form some sort of coherency. And so it's something to really look into the future, because this is a part of Ukraine's plan to really systematize and increase the efficiency of their forces as they go into 2025 and try to prolong and sustain defensive activity. And we'll have to see if this idealized vision actually does come into reality, as the Ukrainians are now planning to completely scrap the existing tactical groupings and strategic operational groupings that really had a lot of overlap and were not very clear in their objectives or their theaters of responsibility or the sort of headquarters that they had assigned. So now all of those are gone, and you're going to begin to see the implementation of Army Corps reportedly. But it would line up with statements made in November. So that's all for today. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.